Alright, so in this last clip, we'll be looking at units, as well as how SketchUp sees them inside the model, and we will configure shortcuts to speed up our workflow. So what we will do now is go into Window, Model Info, and then head into the Units section. So the first thing that we can set in the Units section is the format of the units, and this basically determines how the units are displayed inside of SketchUp, but also what measuring system the units are using. So out of these four formats, only the decimal format allows to set units in the metric system. All the others are variations of units in the imperial system. So I'm going to go back to the architectural format, but basically any notions that I explained for this format can be applied to any format because they're all similar. So the next option we have here is precision. And it's important to clarify what precision are we talking about, because you might think that it's the precision at which the geometry is created inside of SketchUp, but it's actually not the case. So it's the precision at which the dimensions inside of SketchUp see the geometry that's being measured. So I'm gonna illustrate what I mean by that. So if I set the precision to something very low, so 0 inches, and I close this window, if I go here and create a line that's exactly 6.5 inches, so by typing 6.5 in my numerical pad and pressing enter, if I go ahead and then measure this line, you will see that the measurement displayed is 7 inches, although this line is 6.5 inches long. Moreover, there's actually no way of knowing the exact measurement of this line inside of SketchUp, so even if I go in the entity info in the default tray, it's still going to show me the length as being approximately 7 inches. So it knows that it's not 7 inches, but it won't give me the exact measurement. So if I go here into Window, Model Info, and Units, if I change the precision back to, let's say, 1/2 inch, then it's going to show me 6.5. For this reason, I like to model with the highest precision possible. So we're going to go ahead and set it to 164 because it's just going to make it easier for us to see any errors in measurement that we might make when we model. And it will also make our life easier as far as dealing with specific elements such as curves is concerned, because curves aren't actually curves inside of SketchUp. They're a series of straight lines, and setting a high precision will make it easier for us to see any discrepancies in the height of the arc when we make curves. The other point is that you can also always set this lower at a later stage, so working with the highest precision is the best tactic. So the next option here is length snapping. Length snapping works a lot like the grid does in AutoCAD, in that it allows you to create geometry in increments of a certain measurement. So for example, right now this is set to 1 inch. So if I go back here and I create a line that I want to be exactly 2 feet, I can do that without entering any specific dimension, just by dragging it to the right increment. And I actually like to have this option enabled at the very start when I'm working on the conceptual and preliminary phases of a project, because it speeds up my workflow. I don't always have to type dimensions, I can just draw them in freehand. And so the last option here is force display of 0. Now this is very specific to the text inside the dimension line. So if I go ahead and measure this line, which is 2 feet, if I go into the model info and uncheck force display of 0, the dimension will read as 2 foot as opposed to 2 foot 0. So I like to have this on. As far as angles are concerned, the precision is exactly the same as normal units. So once again, highest possible setting. And once again, you can enable length snapping to whichever increment of the angle that you want. So that's about it for units. While we're still in the model info tab, let's take a look at the dimension and text tabs. So in the dimension tabs, you can set the font and text size for the dimensions. So if I click on fonts here, we can see that I can set the style of the text as well as the size of the font. The one thing to note here is that you can set the font size either in points or in height. So points are relative to the screen, and the height of the text will always stay the same regardless of your zoom level on the camera. But height is relative to real world size, and so when you zoom out, this will actually scale with the model. For that reason, for dimensions, I prefer to have it in points. Also, by default, all of the dimensions in SketchUp are this dark gray color, and I find that you see them better when they're black, so we're going to go ahead and change them to that. Here you can also specify the endpoints for your dimensions, so slash is a more standard architectural style of dimensions, so we're going to go ahead and change it to slash. You can also set the dimensions to align to the dimension line instead of the screen, but I find that aligning them to the screen improves readability, so this is better overall. Now, you'll also notice that I've changed all these settings, but my dimensions haven't updated. This is because in SketchUp, you need to select all of the dimensions and then click update for the settings to apply. But these settings will be applied to any new dimension that you create. If we go to the text tab, it's the same principle. So both for the screen text and the leader text, we will change the color to black. And for the leader lines, right now we have closed arrow, which is fine, and leader in a push pin, which is also fine. So one point about leader lines though is that if I make, let's say, a square here, and I make two leader lines like this, so the first one from here, and the second one from the center of this rectangle. So you would probably want the second one to have a black dot instead of the arrow. So I'm going to go ahead, select this, and you can either change this in entity info, so from closed arrow to dot, or you can just right click it and change the arrow to a dot here. And yeah, that's about it as far as dimensions are concerned. I have to say that most of the dimensions that we will be using will be made in layout and not in SketchUp. Nevertheless, it's good to change these settings because sometimes you need to send a quick memo to an engineer or a worker on the construction site about the specific part of the project. And for that, you would put the dimensions directly in SketchUp. So this is useful for that situation. The other thing we need to look into in order to speed up our workflow are shortcuts. So in order to do that, let's go into Window, Preferences, and then into the Shortcuts tab. So in this course, we'll be working a lot with components, and there are some actions that we will be using a lot that don't have a shortcut attached to them by default. So we're going to go ahead and attach a shortcut to them. Fortunately, SketchUp makes this easier for us with the filter function. So we're going to type in hide, and we're going to select the first one here, which is view component edit hide rest of model. So this is going to be really important because we're going to be flickering the model on and off as we work quite often. So I'm just going to go ahead and assign W to this, click on the plus sign. If it asks you to overwrite any default shortcuts you might have attached to that function, say yes. And we're going to select the second one, which is view component edit hide similar components. And I'm going to assign E to this. There we go. Now there are two more shortcuts that we need to assign, but in order for us to do so, we need to select a component first, because the way that filter function works is that it only displays functions that are available for the object that's currently selected. So if we don't have any object selected, it won't filter them. So now let's go to Window, Preferences, and then back here we can type in unique. So edit item make unique. I'm going to assign H to this, which is right next to G, which is the default shortcut for make a component inside of SketchUp. So this is an important one, and the other one we're going to assign is explode. This is also going to be very important, and I'm just going to assign X to it. And now we're going to hit OK. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So to summarize, we've successfully configured our workspace for a much more pleasant and much more optimized modeling experience. Specifically, what we did in this module is that we disabled the Getting Started toolbar and replaced it with a set of more functional UI toolbars. We took an in-depth look at styles and transformed the SketchUp simple style into the modeling style. We analyzed the lighting and fog system and determined when to use it. And we configured our units, dimension lines, and leader text and assigned custom shortcuts to certain functions. In the next module, we'll be looking at plugins as well as how to properly import terrain into SketchUp and configure it for our architectural project.